In your last assignment, you were tasked with taking sketchbook paper and using some of the images you submitted of your subject. You were to create 3 different compositions. When doing this, you had to divide your sketchbook paper up using the rule of thirds. So that was dividing your paper up into thirds in one direction and thirds in the opposite direction. And then you also had to apply a border so that you had a rectangle in the middle of your sketch paper. Your main subject was to fall within one of the areas of the rule of thirds that we discussed about in our previous assignment. And you had to have some background that stretched to at least 3 of the sides of the sketch. So here are my examples, as you already saw on the assignment. I have my 3 sketches completed, each that have the rule of thirds marked out. Each has that border so that I have that center rectangle, and each of them have at least 3 of the 4 sides involved with part of the background going off of the page. So our next step is to now prepare our watercolor paper. So you're going to take a piece of watercolor paper or multimedia paper. As I have mentioned, you cannot use your sketchbook paper for this. It will not withstand the watercolor and all the techniques and the saturation of wetness like a heavier paper like watercolor or multimedia paper will. So I've cut 3 different sizes of watercolor paper so that I can talk to you about applying the rule of thirds and your center rectangle and give you a few scenarios for different sizes of paper. So the first one I'll demonstrate with is 9 by 12. So my first step is I want to mark off my rule of thirds. So looking at my 9 by 12 paper, I'm going to take 9 inches and divide it by 3, so that would be 3 inches. So I'm going to mark at the bottom of my paper lightly at the 3. 3 plus 3 is 6, so that will give me 1/3, 2/3, and my third 1/3 section. And I'm going to move my ruler to the top of the paper, and once again mark very lightly at the 3 and the 6, and I'm going to use my straight edge to line those marks up. And again, I want to draw these lines light. The reason why we want to draw them light is because we're going to eventually erase them. Watercolor is a very translucent, transparent material and medium, so if you have your pencil lines too light, they will show, not too light, you can't have them too light. If you have your pencil lines too dark, they will show up through the watercolor. And if it's a case where you have them very dark and can't erase them, not only will those non-erasable areas be still visible through the watercolor, but you also run the risk that since you've applied so much pressure by making a really dark line, you've most likely dented the surface of the paper, so that when you do apply watercolor, it could actually seep in and pull inside of that crease, and then those lines will show up even more so. So be very careful. Whenever we draw anything, you should always practice drawing very lightly. Most of the time when I demonstrate, and a lot of the images I upload, I either do draw the stuff darker or computer enhance it to be a little bit darker so that you can see it. So like here, I think, at least for me, I can see where my two lines are. But just to make sure that you can see on the demonstration, I'm going to come back and I'm going to make them darker. But yours should be this light that you can barely see them. So now that I have my paper divided into thirds in one direction, I'm going to rotate my paper 1/4 turn. My lines I just drew should now be horizontal, and I'm going to now divide up this measurement into thirds to get my rule of thirds applied. So this paper measures 12 inches. 12 divided by 3 is 4. So I am going to make marks every 4 inches. And again, you want to do this really light. For my demonstration purposes, I have to make these lines a little bit darker so that you can see what I am doing. So there is my paper divided up into the rule of thirds. My next step before I start sketching my subject on here is to create that border. So working with a smaller piece of paper, I would say at the least you want your border to be about 1.5 inches, and I would probably go no more than a 2-inch border on this. We want a nice size border so that we can have room to work with the background that will mainly be in the border. But we need also enough room inside of the border, that rectangle in the middle, to be able to work with materials in there also. So I have on my sketches, which are about 9 by 12, I did a 1.5 inch border, which gave me quite enough room to add details and background around the main center rectangle. For this demonstration, I'm going to try a 2-inch border just so we can see what it looks like. So when applying a border, excuse me, when applying a border, we're going to once again measure like we always do. Make our marks at the bottom of our paper, move our ruler to the top, make our marks there, line the marks at the top to the ones at the bottom with a straight edge, and draw a line. So I'm going to mark at 2 inches, and 12 minus 2 is 10. So 2 and 10. I'll move my ruler to the top of the paper, and once again mark at 2 inches and 10 inches. And as I mentioned, I'm going to line up this bottom mark and top mark with my ruler. And again, you're going to make your lines lighter. I'm going to make mine a little bit darker so we can see what's going on screen. But again, you want these to be very light. Once I have my border lines on there, then I'm going to turn my paper 1/4 of a turn and apply the same size border. So I'm going to apply 2 inch, and this time 9 minus 2 is 7. And the same thing at the top. 2 inch and 7. And once again, I'm going to line my ruler to the top and bottom marks. And again, you would make these lines light. I'm making them dark so we can see. Since I just need the inner rectangle and my rule of thirds, I'm going to erase these lines near the corner of my composition. And again, this is why you want your lines to be really light, so that we can easily erase pencil when we need to. So I'm keeping my rule of thirds, I'm keeping my inner rectangle, and I'm just getting rid of where my 2-inch lines overlapped each other and created this section in the corners. So this paper is now ready for the drawing phase. So I have my rule of thirds marked off, and I have my outer border applied and my rectangle inside. So now I'm going to demonstrate with a piece of paper that is 11 by 14, which is often a popular size you also find in the stores for watercolor or multimedia paper. And I'll do that on a separate video so that those of you who have an 11 by 14 sketchbook, well, watercolor paper or multimedia paper, can watch that video. And those of you who have the 9 by 12 have obviously watched this one.